Be'ezus Hashem, today's daf is Masechta Kiddushin Daf Vav, and we will begin on Daf Vav Amud Aleph by the Mishnah. Mishnah is again talking about how you acquire possessions, property. This chapter, Masechta Kiddushin, is known as the chapter of Kinyonim, acquisitions. And we started how you acquire a wife, how you acquire an Eved Ivri, how you acquire an Eved Knaini. Now we're discussing how you acquire real estate. So the Mishnah says, Nechosim sheyesh lehem achrayos, nechosim that you can foreclose on. Basically, that is another euphemism, another name for property. Niknin, how do you acquire property? That means once you do the following things, you cannot retract. It becomes the property is yours, and you cannot. There's no backseas. So bekesef. So the Mishnah says, if you give money to the seller, as soon as you give that money, it's automatically your property. Uvishtar. Let's say you didn't have enough money, so the seller writes you a deed that this land belongs to you and gives it to you. He gives you a document. Uvachazaka, and another way to acquire the property is chazaka. Chazaka means that you do something to the property that shows ownership. So let's say you put up a fence, or you're going to walk around the property and close up a hole in a fence, or something like that, or put a lock on it, or maybe start working the ground. So that shows that you're the owner of the property. So if you do any of these three things, you acquire ownership of that property. But what happens to, how do you acquire things that you can't foreclose on? Any other movable objects? How does that work? So the Mishnah continues regarding movable items, such as, let's say you want to purchase a watch. How do you acquire ownership of that? Niknim. So the Mishnah says, "Ei niknim elo b'meshitcha." The only way to acquire something like that, or like a light animal or a movable item, you can acquire it via drawing it to you, or even lifting it. That's the best thing. If you lift it up, then it's yours. Just because you paid for something doesn't make it yours. You actually have to bring it towards you or lift it. Nechosim she'ein lehem achrayos niknim im nechosim sheyesh lo achrayos b'kesef v'shtar chazaka. Let's say I'm buying a piece of property, and on the property there's a tractor. So by just finishing up the acquisition on the property, automatically you are acquiring the tractor that's on it, because the movable items can be acquired alongside when you're acquiring property. And once you make the acquisition of property via chesed shtar and chazaka, automatically you can acquire the nechosim she'ein lo achrayos if the person wants to sell it to you, the movable items as well. You don't have to make a separate acquisition on the nechosim she'ein lehem achrayos. Now the Mishnah says it works in the other way as well. When you have to swear, you can only and you're required by Beis Din to swear. For whatever reason, there's a litigation, so you only swear on movable items. But if the subject is a non-movable item, if the subject is real estate, you don't swear. But if you're already swearing because of a movable item, so then they can include into that shvuah regarding the real estate as well. They tack on as the nechosim sheyesh lehem achrayos, real estate, property, the shavelain that you'll swear if you're already swearing on, if you already have a reason that the Beis Din is requiring you to swear on a movable item, so then they can tack on that you'll swear as it relates to real estate as well. Okay, the Gemara is going to discuss all the items mentioned in the Mishnah. First thing that the Mishnah mentioned is that you can acquire a property via kesef, by transfer, by giving over cash. So the Gemara asks, "Kesef v'nolan." How do you know that you could acquire a property just by giving cash? Amar Chizkiya, Amar Kros, Sades b'kesef yiknu. There's a pasuk in Yirmiyah where God is telling Yirmiyah to buy property with kesef, acquire property with kesef. The ema. So let us, but that's only the beginning of the pasuk. Adi ikishtar the ksiv v'chasem b'seifa v'chasem. The end of that pasuk says that buy property with kesef, with money, and also use a document to record the deed. So we see that you need both. you need shtar and kesef in order to acquire that field. Answers the Gemara, right. Ikasiv yiknu libasayf. If the word yiknu appeared at the end of the pasuk, so the pasuk would have said sadeh bekesef v'chasav b'seifa yiknu v'chasaim. Then I would agree with you that you need both to acquire property. You need kesef and shtar. Hashliksiv yiknu mikara. Now that it says the word yiknu in the middle of the pasuk, prior to it discussing shtar, kesef kani. What the pasuk is saying, acquire the property with money, shtar rai ba'alma, and just record the deed as a proof. That's it. But the real kinyan, the acquisition, happens as soon as you transfer the money. So if you transfer the money and you did not, and something happens to the property, even if the deed wasn't recorded yet, it's still your property, and there is no backsies. You can't return it. Rav said, and Rav, we say Rav would be quoting in our day. In our day, we transfer money and then you write the deed, and then you transfer the contract. Rav says, Loi Shanu, our mission was not discussing El B'Mokum She'en Koisen Shtar. If it's not the custom to write a deed, a contract, then you're right. You can acquire the property just with money alone. Ava B'Mokum She'koisen Shtar, like normal U.S. practices, that you transfer the money and also you require a deed, a contract. Loikana, you're not going to consider that the purchaser purchased a property unless he did both, transferred money and received back the document. Be parish, but let's say the purchaser decides to say, I want to acquire the field. So if the purchaser stated that he doesn't want the acquisition to take effect, he wants the acquisition to take effect just by his transfer of money, then it could work. Or he can say that I don't want the acquisition to take effect unless I receive the document. And now here we have a smart thing. Rabbi Idi Bar Oven, he was probably in the real estate business. So when he purchased properties, he wanted to remain, and the option that he could back out more so than the seller. Kizab and Ara, when he would purchase a land, Amar, he would say like this: he'd give over the money and have them write up a document. Now there's a delay from the time that he gave over the money until the time that he received the document. And he said like this: he said the seller can't back out. It's only up to me to back out. And this is the way he formulated his agreement. If I want, bekasba ikni. If I want, I'm going to say that my money made the transaction effective, and I acquired it just by the transfer of money. But I can change my mind and say that bishtara ikna. I want that the document, when I receive the document, that's when I acquire possession of the land, because this is what he meant to say. If I have the option to decide if I want bekasba ikna, I'm going to purchase this land with the money transfer. So I gave over the money. Why? I could decide if the seller wants to back out, he can't, because I already transferred the money. So I already decided that the money is enough for me to have the kinyan take effect. And then then I could decide that no, bishtara ikna, that I wanted the document to be deciding factor of the ownership, if I acquired ownership, because that gives me a little extra time. If I want to back out because I didn't receive the document back from the seller, Hadrana B, I can retract from this sale. So basically, that's how he decided it, to work in his favor, to decide later on whether he's going to effectuate the transaction via kasef or through shtar. The Gemara continues. Uvishtar. We learned in the Mishnah that one of the ways to acquire a property is using shtar. So the Gemara's question is, Manalan, how do I know that shtar is one of the methods to acquire a piece of property? Do you want to say Mishum Diksiv v'chosav v'seifa v'chosam v'heid be'edim? Because the pasuk of Yirmiyah that we mentioned before, where Hashem says to Yirmiyah, purchase land with money and write up a document and sign it and have witnesses will put their names on that document. That's not a good pasuk because shtar rai ba'almahu. In that scenario, we said that the shtar was not that something that effectuated the kinyan and made it effective. It was just a proof that the kinyan happened, but it was really done with the money. So there's bekesef, it was done with money, not because there was a shtar. Ella says the Gemara Mahacha, you see it from the following place. From another pasuk, the ekach as sefer hamikna, and there is discussing real estate, and it says sefer, which is the document hamikna that effectuated, that made it effective, that I acquired it. So we see that in that respect, the pasuk calls shtar one of the methods for you to acquire property. Now says Shmuel, a novel idea. Alma Shmuel, Loishanu, we were not teaching that shtar can work to effectuate a kinyan, el b'shtar matana. If you're giving the property as a gift, a sale that had no money transfer, loikana, it would not work, until you pay the money. If you just have a document that says that I'm selling my property to him, to so-and-so, and he didn't give you the money, then the shtar is not going to work. Rabbi Nuna said, let's say that I have a brisa that contradicts what Shmuel just said. Shtar Ketzad, what's the case? How does shtar work in relation to purchasing property? So the brisa says, if you write on a piece of paper or even on a piece of pottery, even if the pottery itself is not worth a penny, but on the pottery it said, my field is sold to you, or my field is gifted to you. That's called that the property is sold and gifted. So what do you see in this brisa? Clearly that you could use shtar even if you're not gifting the property, but you're selling the property. So how did Shmuel say that shtar doesn't work if you're just selling the property without the transfer of money? Nuna asked this question and he answered it like this. That brisa is talking about the person who wants to sell it really wants to get rid of the property and would like to give it away for free because it's such a bad piece of property or something. It's something bad is going to happen to the property. So because of that, even just writing it on a shtar, it would make the kinyan effective. However, if it's a good piece of property and the seller was not forced to sell it, so then the sale would not be effective just by him writing a shtar that he's selling the field. He has to have received the money. The seller has to receive the money. That's how Rav Huna answers the brisa. So it's not a question against Shmuel. Rav Ashi says, "B'matana bikish litn loy." Really, that brisa is talking about only he wanted to give the property as a gift. So he's gifting the property. So then the question is, why did he write in the document on the pottery that he's selling the property if it was a gift? Basically, it's one case of a gift, but he wrote that my property is sold to you. So that the receiver of the gifts should have some power. In case somebody forecloses on that property because the gifter had a loan that was not paid, so then he can show that he actually paid for it, so he'll be able to come back to the giver of the gift and say, you owe me this money. It wasn't free. It was actually, this has a money value to it. And so that's why he wrote Sodai Mechuri Lach, but really the whole transaction was considered to be a free gift. Then we learned to the Mishnah of Chazaka that you could acquire a property by showing ownership, by doing something to the property that shows that you're the boss. Manola, how do you know that works? Amar Chizki said, Amakra, Pasuk says, Ushvu ba'arechem asher tefastem. Sit in the cities that you took a hold of. But so that's what the pasuk said. How did you grab onto the property? What does the pasuk mean? Be yeshiva, by you building a house and settling in it. That shows that you're the owner. So the pasuk seems to say it's not the money transfer, and it's not the shtar that made this transfer of real estate, but the fact that you showed ownership by settling in that piece of land. So that was one source that Chizkiah brought. The Be'er of Shmuel, Rabbi Shmuel has another source that Chazaka works, because the pasuk says, "V'rishtem oisa," you will inherit Israel. V'shafta and settle it. The pasuk is saying, how are you going to inherit Israel? be yeshiva by settling settling the property. So we see chazaka works when it comes to acquiring property. So the Mishnah says, let's say you want to buy a piece of jewelry. The only way to buy the piece of jewelry is if you actually lift it or bring it towards you. So the Gemara says, Manolan, how do I know that? The pasuk says, so when you purchase something from your friend, from somebody from your nation, or you're selling something to another Jew, or you're buying from another Jew, and the Torah uses miyad amisech, from the hand of another Jew. You're purchasing from the hand of another Jew. So we learn dava hanikna miyad liyad. If you want to purchase something, you have to bring it from his hand to your hand. That's how a source that we know that she'ein lehem achrayis, movable items has the transfer of moving it from his hand to your hands. But according to Rabbi Yochanan the Omar, the money works. So even without the transfer of the watch to the purchaser's hand, just by the fact that the purchaser gave over the money, it's now his watch. What can you say? Why did the Mishnah say that Mishicha works when really Moyes work? Answers the Gemara that rabbis Tana Takanta de Rabbanan Katani. Our Mishnah only discusses Rabbanan types of acquisition. Really, you're right. If I purchase with money, it will that piece of jewelry becomes mine. But Chacham made up that in order to buy the jewelry, I should actually lift the jewelry and bring it to my possession, bring it to my into my hand. Why? Because if I don't, and I just purchase it with money, and it stays by the seller's cabinet there, if there would be a fire and the seller could potentially save the piece of jewelry, he'll say, what am I saving this piece of jewelry? It belongs to somebody else because he gave me the money. I got my money for it, and he's not going to do what he can to save that piece of jewelry in case of a fire. So the Chacham said that despite the transfer, let's say I transfer the money to him in the street, despite me transferring the money, the Chacham said that the kinyan does not take effect unless I went and picked up the piece of jewelry and brought it into my hand. And that was the Tekana Rabbanan, which the Mishnah discusses, that when you're purchasing things that are movable, like a watch, a piece of jewelry, the kinyan does not take effect unless I lifted it and brought it to my hand, brought it next to me. So the Gemara continues. The Mishnah said, and we use this example, that if you have a tractor on a piece of property that you're purchasing, by purchasing the property, you don't have to do another kinyan for the tractor. It just gets dragged along on the purchase of the property. So the Gemara asks, where do you see that idea? In a pasuk, because the pasuk says, the father gave them gifts. Gifts are movable items. Im Ari Mitzures Yehuda, with the fortified cities in Yehuda. So we see that you can buy, it seems that it came along with the purchase of the fortified cities. So once they made the kinyan on the fortified cities, automatically they acquired the gifts. So that's what the Gemara says. So our example that we're using is the tractor on the piece of property that once you made an effective kinyan on the property, you automatically get the tractor. You don't have to do a separate kinyan. The question is, do you need the tractor to be on the field? Do you need it to be piled up onto the property itself or not? Now, once something's on the property, you think you automatically acquire it because once it's your property, you acquire something that's in your property if it's guarded. But let's say it's an open field that has no fence around it. So the only way you're acquiring the tractor is because you made an acquisition on the property. So do you need the tractor to be on the field or piled up on the field or not? Rabbi Yosef said like this, Tashma, come in here. Rabbi Kiva says, Karka Kalshu, let's say you have a piece of land that's the size of an inch. You're obligated to give payah if it's in Israel, but Kurim, the lichtav, we go to Amid Beis, lichtav ala pruzbel, to write a pruzbel on it. Again, the point is this point. And it can be used once you make once you purchase that karka that's the size of an inch, you could automatically make it acquire something that is a movable item. So the amrit be'in and segurim, if you need the movable item to be on the property itself in order for that system to work, kol shu l'may chazi. What is the size of property, the size of an inch? What can it be used for? What could you put on the size of an inch? So how could the Brisa say that a karka kol shu can be used to acquire movable items? It must be that what the Gemara is trying to conclude, it must be that the movable item does not necessarily have to be on the piece of property itself while you're making that acquisition. So the Gemara says not so. Rav Shmuel Bar Yosef. Rav Shmuel Bar Misa translated this in front of Rav Yosef that the Brisa could be talking about. You put a pin. You're trying to acquire a pin. A pin can be put on a karka that's the size of an inch. So that's what the Mishnah was trying to say, that if this karka is the size of an inch and you want to acquire, let's say, a pin, the pin has to be on the piece of karka, but it can work because the karka kosher is considered an acquisition. So the example was that he used that the Brisa is talking about you're trying to acquire a pin along with this karka kosher. Rav Yosef, so Rav Yosef said to Rav Shmuel, Kavasta. Kavashta means you're bothering me with such a answer. The Tana of the Brisa is talking about a situation when you're trying to acquire a pin. I mean, it's such a bad example. Rav Ashi says, what's Rav Yosef bothered by that? Maybe it's a pin with a piece of diamond on it that's worth thousands of dollars. So it's something of value. So the Bryce is teaching you a beautiful thing, that if you're buying a karka kolshu and there's a pin with a diamond on it that's stuck into the ground, you could acquire just by making the acquisition on the karka kolshu, you automatically acquire the pin. But the pin has to be on the land itself. So the Gemara continues in discussing this concept of, can I be kaina when I'm kaina movable items? Does it have to be on the piece of real estate itself, or can you just have it as a separate entity? It's off the real estate, it's held somewhere else, but just acquiring the real estate, you automatically acquire the movable items. So Tashma coming here. Amar Ablaza, somebody from Modain. Shahai Yerushalayim, he was in Yerushalayim. So obviously he's not where he lives. He was in Jerusalem. He had a lot of movable items, clothing, whatever he had, a car. He had a lot of movable things, and that he wanted a vikish litn mamtana. When you get to Jerusalem, you become more generous, and he wanted to give it as a gift to somebody. So the Chacham said, "Ein like tekana, ach yaklim al gabe karka." You first need to buy a piece of land. Buy a piece of land in Jerusalem, and then automatically by you gifting them the land, they'll get also all these metaltalin, these movable items that you want to give them. Ma'asa, what did he do? So halach v'lokach beisela samad Yerushalayim. He bought a tiny piece of bad land, unusable land in Jerusalem, beisela, like a coin's worth of land. V'oman, he said, Savayni zela ploini. A piece of this coin. It's worth of land, let's say the size of a coin's worth, size of a coin land should belong to so and so. The imai, and I'm gifting him that piece of land. The imai along with meyatzayin, 100 sheep, umeyachavis, and 100 barrels, umeis, and then he died in Jerusalem. So the kimas devarov, and the Chacham said that was a good kinyan, and they ratified what he said. So we see that it doesn't have to be on top. So now the Gemara completes its point. The Amrit, if you say being in Surim, that you need the movable items to be on the piece of land, they sell a field the size of a coin. What could you put? You put 100 sheep and 100 barrels on the field that's the size of a coin. And says the Gemara, Mi Sabra Beisel Salamamish. Do you think that this was a land the size of a coin? My Sela, what does it mean, Sela? The Nafesh Tuva. Tuva means it was very, very big. So Vamai Karli Sela, then why do you call it a coin piece of land? The size of a coin? It wasn't the size of a coin. It was very, very big. The Kosha Kisela, it was hard like a rock. In other words, it was bedrock. and therefore wasn't usable for planting, and therefore he was able to buy it very quickly on the cheap. But it had the ability to hold all his movable items, and there's no proof. Maybe they moved all his movable items onto the piece of land itself, which was very large. Tashma, come in here. Rabbi Yehuda said the name of Rav. There was a person who was very sick in Jerusalem. Now, normally a sick person, whatever comes out of his mouth is automatically ratified. But if you hold that he was sick, Rabbi Eliezer, then we go according to Rabbi Lezer, that even when a person's on his deathbed, whatever comes out of his mouth is not ratified. The Amrila, another said Barihaya, that the story was that man was very healthy. So it's not a done deal. So you really, whatever comes out of his mouth, you need to make an opinion. You have to have a regular acquisition. According to Rabbanan. So imagine this one person, healthy person, he had a lot of movable items, he wanted to give it as a gift. And it's very hard for them to go lift up every movable item that was his. Let's say he had big furniture. So the Chachamim gave him an idea. Make sure that you're selling it or gifting it on the back of gifting them a piece of land. So Ma'asa, what did he do? He bought a little piece of Reva, which is a small square footage of land. Here the Brisa says it was very small, a small like square foot of land next to Yerushalayim. Valman, he said, Tefach al Tefach l'ploini v'ima meyes tzaynu me'echaviyas. He said a tefach, an inch by an inch, should belong to so and so, and the sheep, 100 sheep and 100 barrels should also belong to him. Umeis, then he died. V'kimu chachamim as devarav, and the chachamim ratified what he said. So here it's obviously the Brisa says clearly that it was a piece of land, tefach al tefach, and he already acquired through that acquisition of the land, he acquired 100 sheep and 100 barrels. So you see, if you say that that you need the property to be the movable items to be on the property, by a property inch by an inch, a tefah by tefah, what could you put on it? You certainly can't put on 100 sheep and 100 barrels. And says the Gemara, the Brisa is talking about lidmei, that he wasn't giving 100 sign and 100 chavis, 100 sheep and 100 barrels. He was giving money, cash, and cash you could put on tefach al tefach. It must be that it's logical that the Brisa is talking about he was giving cash. He wasn't putting on actual sheep. He was actually giving sheep and barrels. What did he have to buy this whole property? He could just go over to the guy and say, give me a handkerchief and I'm gifting you 100 sheep and 100 barrels. So that must be that it was money. And money is not, if you're giving money doesn't, Chalipin wouldn't work. So they must be, you think you're correct with May that he was actually only giving money. He wasn't actually giving sheep and barrels. So then why did he have to, you don't even have to do Chalipin. If I'm giving cash to somebody, just give the cash over to somebody. The real reason, the Leis Makabel Matona, the recipient of the gift was not in his presence. So therefore, therefore you can say the reason why he didn't use Chalipin was the Leis Makabel Matona, that he was not there. And because of that, so you don't have a proof, you don't have a logical reason to say that we're dealing here with money. You could equally have said that we're dealing with actual sheep and actual barrels. So your hachinama mistavra, your logical proof that you're correct, that it's talking about the May, is not a complete proof. So the Gemara says, "V'niske nale agav archa." So what was the problem? Why the Gemara just asks a side question? Why did he have to buy the property in the first place? Why didn't he go over to somebody and says, this should be his property. I'm trying to give him movable items. He's not around, the recipient of this gift, so he should merit it to give it. Somebody else should acquire the kinyan on his behalf, and that can be done even if the presence of the recipient is not there, since this is for his benefit. So you could have somebody else do it on his behalf. Answers the Gemara, Loisam Chadaita. The gifter, the one giving the gift, he didn't believe that the other people will actually retell the recipient and therefore, or give over the movable items to the recipient. So he didn't trust anybody. And because he had these movable items in his house in a protective way, he actually wanted to give it over to the recipient, and that the recipient should know about it. So they're gonna go to his house and eat and use the movable items and not give it over to the end recipient. The elamai ein loy takana. So what do you mean ein loy takana? Why did the Brisa say that there's no other way around it? If he was the gifter was a trusting person, he could have had somebody else zoicha on the behalf of the recipient. So the Gemara says hachikama. Because he was not a trusting person, so therefore the only way around it was for him to buy a little piece of land and actually put the movable items on the piece of land. But the Gemara says it's not a complete proof, because maybe he actually was only giving over cash, and cash you can put on a very small piece of land. So the Gemara did not answer our question yet, and we'll continue with this on the next Daf.